Hello everybody and welcome to the Great Guild Wars 2 Countdown. The footage in the background for today comes from Bad Presents, so thank you very much to them. This is from the beta weekend. As I said, we're still doing community footage. I'm wondering, tell me if you guys really don't like the idea of beta footage going up, because if you don't, what I might have to do is ask for everyone who wants their footage to be on this show again, to put their names forward to me, and we'll try and generate a new list of more up-to-date stuff of the game at launch, if you guys are really keen on that. If not, then we can keep using the beta stuff. I don't really mind. But anyway, thank you very much to Bad Presents, and you can find a link in the description down below. There is only one day remaining until the launch of Guild Wars 2. If you haven't pre-ordered or pre-purchased, at this point you'll already be in-game. I was in Vent earlier, and one of my friends who'd pre-ordered finally got in, and yeah, that was a few hours ago now, so really it's just the last batch of people waiting. I guess this episode, really, since a lot of us already have kind of been in there, this one will just kind of pass with a little bit less fanfare. But really, this is kind of it. This is the last episode of the countdown before we return to Guild Wars 2 Daily, which really doesn't mean very much. But yeah, this is the final day. It's very interesting to me to think of the amount of players that are going to be coming into the game tomorrow, like when the actual game launches, compared to how many pre-purchased or pre-ordered, because it was very easy to pre-purchase and to pre-order Guild Wars 2 and to get these little head starts. So I have to wonder how many people who wanted to play the game realised you could do that and go for it. I do kind of maintain that we'll probably get just as many, if not more, people that came with the pre-purchase and the pre-orders tomorrow on the actual launch as we did otherwise, because even though these things did exist and didn't necessarily cost any more money, they just cost money earlier on, I don't actually think that everyone was aware of that. There'll be a lot more casual players that are kind of coming into the game for the first time and they didn't look into it too much, but maybe they've just heard from their friends that a new MMO's out and they'll be playing, and I really do think we'll see another flush of players, but it's interesting to see how that will go. It's also interesting to see whether the issues that are kind of going on in game will be ironed out by that point. There have been a lot of people, I guess the general consensus with a lot of people I interact with is that it doesn't matter if the game is somewhat broken in these small areas, like with the trading post is currently down and so forth. It doesn't really matter at the moment because it's still just the head start, I suppose, which I think is reasonably excusable. I think in general the game's been really, really good for these 3 days. It's been a playable game. It hasn't been a very laggy game. There's been certain aspects of the game that have been a little bit harder to work with, like the guilds or the partying system, just seem to be a bit off and seem to have been tuned in different ways that are kind of a little bit irritating, but the game is there and it's playable, and it's only been down for 3 hours, so I do actually think that the launch has gone very, very smoothly despite these things. We'll just have to see how long they last for, because a bunch of people are going to come in, and surely that's going to stress the servers even more, so I'm curious anyway. Hopefully it doesn't mean anything bad for us that are already in there, and hopefully, as I say, the trading post as well will come up, because I'm like super into crafting at the moment, and I really want to be able to get on the trading post and buy some of the fine materials, because my god, I've got plenty of the other stuff, but it's the fine materials really drain away. I tried to do artificing and tailoring at the same time, but because they both draw from that same pool of fine materials, it just wasn't really working out for me. So now I'm doing tailoring and cooking, which is quite cool. So yeah. Also, yesterday I did want to clarify something. I talked about how I was playing a Mesmer and I wasn't massively happy with the Mesmer, and that I missed the Elementalist. A couple of things. First, I do think Mesmers are good. They certainly seem very overpowered in PvP, and I'll be using my Mesmer in PvP all the time, definitely. And Elementalists in comparison, I think, are one of the worst PvP classes at this point, even when you have played it a lot. It's very easy to say, oh, this is just a class that's got a very high skill ceiling, but honestly, I think anyone can say that and not be called out on it, because you come across very big-headed to challenge someone who says something like that. I actually think Elementalists, even if you are quite good with them, don't have that much options, really competitively. It certainly seems like they're more support-oriented rather than DPS or anything when you really get down to the nitty-gritty of it. So anyway, yeah, Mesmer, just a lot of people felt, I guess, abashed by my decision to stop playing Mesmer yesterday, which I did make, by the way. I was in doubt yesterday, but I did make the decision to re-roll. And I do like Mesmers very much, but I have now got my Elementalist. My Elementalist is now like level 23, which is where I got my Mesmer to before re-rolling. And yeah, I'm just generally having a lot of fun in the game. I might do another kind of updatey video where we're actually in-game looking at my footage as we go forward, maybe later on in a few days, so that we can just kind of follow that if you guys are interested. But yeah, I've generally been having a lot of fun, and I'm still really curious how you guys have been doing and how your progress is coming along. I had a few comments yesterday, of a few more comments than I expected, actually, of people talking about being on the phone to support and stuff, so maybe it hasn't been a totally smooth ride for all of us, but it certainly has for me and everyone I know, so at least that is. Hopefully, if you have had any problems, that's been sorted out. Anyway, on to more kind of proper news stuff, not just about me. There have been a ton of tweet from ArenaNet. If you are having a problem like that and you aren't following ArenaNet on Twitter or on Facebook, might pay off to actually have a little bit of a look, because they do announce a lot of stuff and a lot of problems and a lot of solutions and stuff on there and what they're working on. So, for example, we know as of 4 hours ago, ArenaNet was still working on bringing the trading post back up. So, stuff like that. There's a lot of little bits of news about that, about specific errors. So, I'm not going to list through all of it, but if you are having a problem, check out their Twitter, I would say that much. Still no news on the live action stuff or anything like that as far as I've seen. However, there was announced a strategy guide for Guild Wars 2 on the main website. This is a very weird product, I think, to sell for an MMO, because MMOs are ever changing, right? There are so many updates and changes that happen to MMOs. It's the same old story, no matter what MMO you pick, as long as they've got a semi-competent live team. If you stop playing that MMO for like 3 months and load back in, you're usually going to have a bit of a weird situation where you're like, oh, look, all my skills are doing different things, or oh, look at it, and then all these different features have come. So it's really weird for me to think that they do a strategy guide for an MMO when it could be very easily obsolete incredibly quickly. And in fact, they did a strategy guide for factions in Guild Wars 1, only factions for some reason. And the main thing with that guide was, yes, it became obsolete quite quickly, but it did have some tangible information that remained solid. And also that guide had a lot of lore as well added in it, that I'm still not sure whether we consider canon or not, a lot of the lore that was in that. But a lot that we know out of Cantha comes just from that guide, and it seems to be a lot of lore that was written that kind of never made it into the game. But yeah, they're really interesting pieces, because I'm not sure how useful they are, but they're very, very interesting to look at after a couple of years and to go back and be like, oh my god, this is how they're describing the Ranger. So the guide is described as a comprehensive guide to all things Tyria. This thick tome of knowledge is packed with as much information and analysis that Brady Games could fit between the covers. Inside the official strategy guide, you'll find detailed maps, exhaustive profession and skill analysis, advice on building your character, info about crafting, and a walkthrough for the first 25 levels, tons of tips and more. So it's only actually a walkthrough for the first 25 levels, none of the story stuff beyond that. It's just interesting. I mean, I certainly don't look at this and think to myself, this is something I want to buy. I really don't, just because it will become obsolete. But it's, funnily enough, when for most people, I guess, the use has been left from it, I'd be most interested in buying this in a long time when it is obsolete, just to look back on it. But anyway, they've announced that it's a digital item. If you want it, you can have it very, very quickly. You don't have to wait for anything to come in the post. So yeah, that's kind of the only thing that's come out on the ArenaNet website. I will announce anything else as it comes forward. The first question is from Sekarosis, who says, Dear WP, it seemed to me that the checklist mentality might be a problem in Guild Wars 2, but from my personal experience of the game so far, I've only ran around doing events as they pop up. Very rarely do I look at my map, and I only use my mini-map for points of interest, etc, etc. Once I got into the game, I was able to run around and explore while still completing many events. I'm currently in the Sylvari starting area. However, I'm taking on enemies a few levels higher than me, because instead of doing events in a kind of order, I'm simply doing them as I find them. My opinions on this have changed a little bit, actually, recently. Now that I've played through 2 characters, the first character I played, I spent a long time just kind of relaxing and going at my own pace, and all the leveling felt very appropriate, very good. It seems to have slowed down a little bit from the betas, but actually I quite like that. I like that the leveling curve is just that little bit longer. I do prefer it to take that extra bit of time to gain each individual level. I feel like that will make it feel more significant and more important when it gets to 80. I don't like the idea of it all rushing by. You're only going to get to 80 on your main once. You should savour it and enjoy it. So I very much did enjoy the rate that I was leveling up when I was taking my time with it, and the events seemed to be coming fast enough, and they were varied enough for it to really feel just natural and fun. Now, on my next character, the Elementalist, I kind of got in game. I finished Metrica Province. I got 100% there, and I realised I just felt like I wasn't making real progress, because I wanted this character to be at the same place that my Mesmer originally was. So I decided, right, okay, I will just complete everything the Mesmer did. I went to Queensdale and I went to Kessex Hills, and I tried to rush through those as quick as possible, and Divinity's Reach, and that was a very different experience. But I feel like it's actually quite balanced, because I went through and rushed through these things, and I came out of these zones at a much lower level than the amount of levels I would have gained, or experience, or karma I would have gained from doing them slowly originally on my Mesmer. But at the same time, it was still quite fun to do, and it's changed my perspective on events as well. I was really worried that the game, when it came out, it would be really bad if certain events were cycling too quickly, because it would just diminish, oh, have I really helped out in this area, and it would take that away. But actually, I get quite excited, and I quite like these events now that I've seen have been repeating every now and then, just because they get offer such nice rewards, and I never really thought I'd end up thinking of it that way, but I have kind of already, I suppose, been conditioned to look at this, and you really can feel very quickly how important the events are, and seeking out the events is such a big component of progressing through the game. And I already find that if there's an event going on or there's a heart going on, I go for the event. The heart is always there, the event isn't always there, and the event is a ton of extra experience, often more than you'll get from the heart in the first place. So because of this, even though people have this checklist mentality, I feel like quite quickly we've been conditioned to just leave that anyway. We will allow ourselves to be distracted by events and various things in the area rather than just running from point to point to point, because that is the best way to go through the game rather than doing the checklist, because that can wait. So it's changed my perspective a little bit. I'm not worried at all about it. I thought that they could slip up in all these different places. Things that I thought would break the system actually are just fun parts of the game, which I'm really happy to say. So yeah, that's been kind of a bit of an eye-opener for me. This is a question people talk about quite a lot, and now that I'm in game, I feel like it's just kind of melded all in quite nicely. You're rewarded for taking your time, and at the same time, you're not really punished for rushing around either. What do you guys think, though? Have you been experiencing anything like this? Has there been a lot of problems, in your opinion, with leveling up? I'm really curious how other people are taking to the game right now. I, in my own circles, haven't heard any negativity, so that's kind of where you guys come in. Let's see whether anyone's having any problems. The next question is from Mr. Newman, who says, I was wondering if you would agree with me that Guild Wars 2 seems way too happy compared to Guild Wars 1. Most overlook that the original game had a really dark storyline, releasing Palawa Joko just to save Alona for now, only to have it almost wiped out completely of humanity in a short while. Cantha being infested with a deadly infection, Tengu Wars, human sacrifice, etc. The game being so cartoony kind of makes it hard for me to consider the Elder Dragons a real threat. Well, I'm not sure why you think it's cartoony. I don't get the cartoony feel out of it. It's certainly more light-hearted from what we've been experiencing right now. My general stance here is I would defend Guild Wars 2 at this point. Why? Because Guild Wars 1, although it had dark stories, it had a very light-hearted flavour to them. You just mentioned Palawa Joko. Was he really a dark, grim character? Do we hate Palawa Joko? No, we love the guy. He joked about and he had a brilliant, colourful personality. He's awesome. And even though he was all evil and terrible and there was all this bad stuff going on in Nightfall, there were comedy relief characters in there like Goran and Norgu to an extent, and even one of the villains here was in that camp. There was always a lot more light-hearted overtones to it all, particularly when you looked at the amount of references they had in Guild Wars 1, which have been cut back in Guild Wars 2. But that aside, I do agree that Guild Wars 1 had some very dark stuff. In fact, I would say they were most edgy with Guild Wars 1 in this regard. On Prophecies. Prophecies, they did something pretty cool, actually. They showed people this really beautiful, nice area for the first couple of levels, and then stole it away from them, snatched it away, and made you walk around this horrible wasteland. And one of the big criticisms from people that originally quit out of Prophecies early on was that they just didn't like the setting of Ascalon after it was destroyed. They were suddenly in this murky, horrible place, and it was just a depressing experience. Factions did the same kind of thing. You start off in a nice Xingji Island, and then you were just in this depressing, horrible, long, sprawling labyrinth of a city for so long. Now, the idea of these places, obviously, I really liked this myself, because the idea is you get a bit of the high, and now you're in the low, you're in ruined Ascalon, but you know that over those mountains in Kryta is this beautiful land, and you're kind of compelled, and it feels better when you get there, and that is a rewarding experience. But this was a problem a lot of people had, especially with Prophecies, when it kind of just changed everything so much. Now, that was quite extreme what they did with Prophecies. People felt like they got to know the world, and then everything changed and it all felt a bit disjointed, and some people got thrown out of the story very early, and that could have even led to them eventually leaving the game. You know, if they weren't particularly enjoying the mechanics, and now they've been thrown this huge curveball in the story that they didn't enjoy either, then what's keeping them there? And that did kind of happen with Prophecies. So I think with Guild Wars 2, they've been more careful about this. They've tried to make it a more welcoming experience in those early levels, and there's a more gradual progression. This is my main point, that in Guild Wars 2, we haven't really been to the end of the game. You're in the early game areas, and the game is supposed to be on that high. You're still on that high that Guild Wars 1 presented to you as well. In Queensdale, it's not meant to be all doom and gloom right out of the bat. The compelling thing about the story is that you remember the good times from a long time ago when you're there in awe and you're in the desolation and you're all these terrible places, and you remember all the beautiful areas you once went to, and you know what you're fighting for. There's this whole theme going on here, and that's the important thing. I think that will spread across all of the races as well. You're kind of in the happy areas early on, and that's where a lot of us are at right now. I don't know who's got to awe at this point. I know people can run there, but they won't be level appropriate for it, but that's the way it's going. Right now, the Elder Dragons don't feel like a threat, because I think in the story they're supposed to be slowly seeping in as a threat. I am a little bit worried that I'm not going to be that compelled to hate the Elder Dragons or anything, just because I don't find them to be relatable enemies at all. But I think that's a different question we're now talking about. I actually think they're quite flat. For the big nemesis and the big end of the game and the big bosses and the big antagonists, they're actually very flat, and they're not very interesting or dynamic characters or personalities. They're just, oh, this thing is evil, and I find it hard to be very compelled to hate something like that or really get involved with that story. So I do think Guild Wars 2 is lacking in that regard anyway, because the Elder Dragons just, they're not great villains in the first place. But the way that the game's presenting the story, I don't think it's necessarily a lighter story. I think Guild Wars 2 will be very dark in the end, come the end of your personal story. We have heard that some pretty terrible stuff happens in the personal story. I'm not going to go with a super old example we know of that happens in Queensdale, but there's more stuff like that. We'll just have to wait until we progress through. So yeah, I kind of defend Guild Wars 2 on that point at the moment. But there you go, guys. That's the Great Guild Wars 2 countdown for today, and indeed for the rest of time until they do like an expansion, and then we'll probably have another countdown. So thank you very much for watching, everyone. Thank you for all of you who might have seen me when we very first started, when I had a very different idea for the series. It was just going to be a different feature about the game in its own little video alongside daily. It kind of evolved as we went forward there, but I had a lot of fun with this. I hope you guys had a lot of fun too. There's nothing quite like waiting for a game to launch. Hopefully it has been everything you've expected. Do feel free to stay with me for discussion and stuff about the game as we continue forward, news, stuff like that. That will just be Guild Wars 2 Daily making its triumphant return, and I hope to see you there. If not, have fun in Guild Wars 2. It's been a great waiting game to share with you all. I will see you next time. See you next time, everybody.